You can't be at the launch tonight, Jessica. My investors expect a certain kind of energy, and you've never been good at reading the room. Lauren has been helping me with the final pitch deck. She gets what this company needs to look like. This isn't about us. This is about securing the funding that will change everything for me. If you really cared about my success, you would stay home and stop making this about your feelings. Hi, my name is Jessica Reynolds. I am 27 years old. Those 5 sentences landed like glass shattering on tile. Michael didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look at me while he adjusted his tie in the hallway mirror. He just spoke them like he was reading from a script he had rehearsed. My younger sister Lauren stood a few feet behind him, already dressed in the navy blazer I had helped pick out for her 2 weeks earlier when she offered to assist with logistics. She kept her eyes on her phone thumbs, moving like none of this concerned her. I stood in the doorway of our small apartment kitchen, still holding the coffee mug I had poured for him. The ceramic felt heavier than it should have. My fingers tightened around it until my knuckles ached. I waited for him to turn around to laugh to say he was joking. He didn't. He picked up his leather bag, kissed the air near my cheek, without actually touching me, and walked out. Lauren followed 2 steps behind. The door clicked shut with a sound that felt final. Have you ever watched the person you built your life around decide you no longer fit the picture they want to show the world? I never thought it would happen to me. Not with Michael. Not with Lauren. But that morning, standing in the quiet apartment we had shared for 3 years, I felt the ground shift under my feet in a way that made breathing difficult. I set the mug down before my hand started shaking too hard to hold it. I met Michael when I was 24, working as a junior marketing coordinator at a small agency downtown. He was charming in a quiet, steady way that made you feel safe. He had this way of listening like every word you said mattered. After 6 months of dating, he told me he wanted to start his own consulting firm, helping local businesses with operations and client systems. He had the vision. He just needed someone who understood spreadsheets and contracts and how to make numbers tell a story investors would believe. I believed in him. I used my evenings and weekends to build his pitch decks, his website copy, even the basic financial projections. When he asked me to co-sign the small business loan, because his credit was still recovering from a previous venture that hadn't worked out, I didn't hesitate. My name went on the paperwork alongside his. My savings covered the first 3 months of rent for the tiny office space. I told myself we were building something together. That was the story I told myself every time I stayed late at my own job, so I could come home and keep working on his. Lauren started coming around more often about 8 months ago. She was 24, still figuring out what she wanted to do after dropping out of college for the second time. Michael said she was good with people and could help with networking events. I wanted to support my sister, so I encouraged it. I even helped her put together a simple resume and introduced her to a couple of contacts who might have part-time work. She started staying later and later at the office to learn. Michael started coming home later too. He said they were finalizing materials for the big investor pitch that was supposed to secure the funding to scale the company. I noticed small things first. Lauren began wearing clothes that looked a lot like the ones I used to wear when Michael and I first started dating. She started finishing his sentences during family dinners. My mother commented once that they made a good team. I brushed it off. Michael and I had been together long enough that I trusted the foundation we built. I told myself I was being insecure, that I was tired from juggling my full-time job and helping him on nights and weekends. The week before the launch, Michael started pulling away in ways I couldn't ignore. He stopped asking for my input on the pitch. When I offered to review the final numbers, he said Lauren had already handled it. When I asked if I could attend the investor meeting as his wife and the person who had helped build the financial model, he changed the subject. I kept trying to find the right moment to ask what was happening between us. Every time I tried, he told me I was overthinking again. That morning after he and Lauren left, I sat on the edge of our bed and opened my laptop. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I just needed something to do with my hands. An email notification popped up from the shared business account. It was a calendar invite for the investor pitch that evening. The attendee list included Michael Lauren, David Ramirez, the potential lead investor Michael had been courting for weeks, and 2 other names I didn't recognize. My name was not on the list. I scrolled down. There was a note attached to the invite. It was from Michael to the group. It read, "Lauren will be handling all follow-up questions on the operational side. She has been instrumental in getting us to this point. Jessica is unfortunately unable to attend due to a prior commitment." I read the sentence 3 times. My chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped a band around my ribs and was slowly pulling it tighter. I had cleared my entire day for this. I had taken a personal day from my job. I had stayed up until 2 in the morning the night before, helping him rehearse answers to possible questions about cash flow. And now he was telling strangers that I had a prior commitment. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a text from Lauren. "Hey, Jess, just wanted to say, I'm really sorry you can't make it tonight. Michael said you were feeling overwhelmed and needed space. I'll make sure everything goes smoothly. Love you." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Overwhelmed. Space. Love you. The same sister who had borrowed my car for 3 months without putting gas in it, who had forgotten to pay me back the $800 I lent her for rent last year, was now speaking for me to my own husband. I set the phone down and walked into the small second bedroom we used as a makeshift office. The desk still had my notes from the financial model I built. The sticky notes with my handwriting were still stuck to the monitor. I opened the bottom drawer where we kept the physical copies of the business formation documents. My name was listed as a co-founder on the original LLC paperwork. I had insisted on it when we filed because I had put in the initial capital and the hours. Michael had agreed without argument at the time. He said it was only fair. I pulled out the folder and flipped through the pages. Something felt off. The most recent amendment to the operating agreement was dated 2 weeks ago. I didn't remember signing anything new. I scanned the signature page. Michael's signature was there. Lauren's name appeared as a witness. My signature line was blank. My hands started to shake again. I sat down on the floor because my legs didn't feel steady enough to hold me. I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app we used for the business. The login still worked. I checked the recent transactions. There was a transfer from the business account to a personal account I didn't recognize. It was for $3,000 labeled consulting services. The date was 4 days ago. Lauren's name wasn't on the account, but the memo line had her initials in parentheses. I closed the app and sat there in the quiet room, surrounded by the papers I had helped create. The apartment felt too small and too empty at the same time. I could hear the clock in the living room ticking. Every second that passed felt like it was pushing me further away from the life I thought I was living. I didn't cry. Not yet. The hurt was still too sharp, too fresh, sitting right under my ribs like a splinter I couldn't reach. I just kept staring at the amendment page with the blank signature line. Michael had changed the structure of the company we built together and hadn't even told me. He had let my sister witness it. And now he was bringing her to the meeting that was supposed to secure our future while telling everyone I couldn't be there. I picked up my phone again and opened a new message to Olivia Bennett, my closest friend from college. She worked in human resources at a larger firm and had always been the one I called when things felt off, but I couldn't name why. I typed 3 words, "Can you talk?" She called me back within 2 minutes. "Jess, what's wrong? You never text like that in the middle of the day." I told her everything. The exclusion from the invite, the amendment I hadn't signed, the transfer, the way Michael had spoken to me that morning like I was an obstacle instead of his wife. Olivia listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Jess, I need you to hear me," she said finally. "This isn't just cold feet or stress about the pitch. This is him rewriting the story of your marriage and your business without you in it. And he's using your sister to do it." I closed my eyes. Hearing someone else say it out loud made it real in a way I hadn't been ready for. "I don't know what to do," I whispered. "You don't have to decide everything today," Olivia said, "but you need to protect yourself. Call Thomas Gray, the accountant who helped you with your taxes last year. Ask him to look at the business filings and that amendment. Don't sign anything. Don't go to that meeting unless you decide you want to. And Jess, you are allowed to be angry about this." After we hung up, I sat on the floor for a long time. The light coming through the window shifted across the papers scattered around me. I thought about all the nights I had stayed up helping Michael build this. All the times I had defended him to my parents when they questioned whether he was stable enough. All the times Lauren had sat at our kitchen table, laughing at my jokes while I cooked dinner for everyone. I stood up slowly. My legs still felt unsteady, but I made myself move. I gathered the documents and put them back in the folder. I didn't know yet what I was going to do with them. I only knew I wasn't going to pretend this morning hadn't happened. I wasn't going to keep making excuses for the way Michael spoke to me or the way Lauren had stepped into the space he had cleared for her. I walked into the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were red but dry. My hands were still shaking a little. I splashed cold water on my face and took a slow breath. The woman staring back at me didn't look like someone who was about to fall apart. She looked like someone who had just realized the floor she had been standing on was never as solid as she believed. I picked up my phone and texted Thomas Gray. I asked if he had time for a quick call that afternoon. He replied within 10 minutes and said he could talk at 3. I set the phone down and looked at the clock. It was only 11 in the morning. The investor pitch was still 7 hours away. I didn't know if I was going to show up or not. I didn't know if I was going to confront Michael or Lauren or both of them. I only knew that something had broken open inside me that morning, and I was not going to be able to close it again by pretending everything was fine. I sat down at the kitchen table with a notebook and started writing down every conversation I could remember from the last 2 months. Every time Michael had told me I was overreacting. Every time Lauren had offered to help in a way that pushed me further to the side. Every promise he had made about our future that now felt like it had conditions attached I hadn't seen until today. By the time I finished, the page was full. My handwriting was messy in some places where my hand had shaken. I stared at the list and felt something shift again, quieter this time. It wasn't anger yet. It was something colder and clearer. It was the beginning of understanding that the life I had been fighting to hold together was already coming apart. And maybe the kindest thing I could do for myself was to stop trying to tape it back together with excuses. I closed the notebook. The apartment was still quiet. Outside cars passed on the street below. Somewhere across town, Michael and Lauren were probably rehearsing their pitch, practicing the version of the story where I had never been part of it. I sat at the table and let the silence settle around me. For the first time in a long time, I didn't fill it with plans to fix anything. I just sat there breathing and waited to see what I would do next. I sat at the kitchen table for another 20 minutes after I finished writing the list. The notebook pages felt rough under my fingertips. Every line I had written stared back at me like evidence I had been too afraid to collect until that morning. I kept hearing Michael's voice in my head, calm and detached, telling me I didn't fit the image they needed. I kept seeing Lauren's name on the calendar invite, like she had always belonged there more than I did. At exactly 3 o'clock, I called Thomas Gray. He answered on the second ring, his voice steady, the way it always was when he talked about paperwork and numbers. I told him about the amendment I hadn't signed the blank signature line and the transfer that had gone out 4 days earlier. He asked me to send him photos of the documents. I did it with shaking hands while we stayed on the line. "Jessica," he said. After a few minutes of silence on his end, this amendment was filed without your consent. That alone makes it questionable. But there's something else. The operating agreement you originally signed gave you 25% equity. The new version reduces it to 5% and adds a clause that lets the majority holder buy out the minority at a fixed low value if there's a disagreement. Your husband signed it 2 weeks ago. Your sister signed as witness. I felt the air leave my lungs in one slow breath. 25% to 5%. He had been planning to shrink my place in the company we built together while I was still helping him rehearse answers for investors. I asked Thomas if there was any way this could be legal. He said it depended on whether I had ever given verbal approval or signed anything electronically that I might have forgotten. I knew I hadn't. I would have remembered something that big. He paused again. There are also 3 transfers out of the business account in the last month that don't match any invoices or payroll. One went to a personal account ending in 4472. Do you recognize that number? I didn't. Michael and I had always used the same joint accounts for everything. I told Thomas I would check our old statements and call him back. After we hung up, I sat very still, the phone still warm in my hand. The quiet in the apartment pressed against my ears. I felt something crack open deeper than before, not just hurt now, but a cold, clear anger that made my stomach turn. I opened the banking app again and searched for the account ending in 4472. It wasn't listed anywhere in our shared records. I cross-checked the dates of the transfers Thomas mentioned. One of them matched the day Michael had told me he needed to borrow $2,000 from our savings because a client payment was delayed. He had promised to pay it back the next week. The money had never appeared. My phone lit up with a text from Michael. It was almost 4 o'clock. "Did you calm down yet? Lauren said you sounded upset when she texted you this morning. The pitch is going well so far. Don't make this into a bigger thing than it needs to be. We can talk tonight." I read it twice. Calm down. Don't make this into a bigger thing. He hadn't asked how I was. He hadn't explained the amendment or the missing money. He had just told me not to ruin his night. I typed 3 different replies and deleted all of them. Nothing I could say in a text would fix what was already broken. Instead, I called Olivia. She picked up immediately, like she had been waiting. I told her what Thomas had found. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Jess, this isn't just him being selfish about the launch. This is him trying to cut you out of something you helped create. And he's letting your sister help him do it. You need to decide right now what you're willing to lose to keep any piece of this." I told her I didn't know yet. She didn't push. She just said she was home if I needed to come over later, no matter what time. After we hung up, I walked into the bedroom and opened the closet. Michael's side still had his good suit hanging there, the one he wore to every important meeting. I ran my hand over the sleeve and felt the familiar fabric. 3 years of mornings where I had straightened his tie before he left. 3 years of believing we were on the same side. I pulled my own overnight bag from the top shelf and set it on the bed. I didn't pack anything yet. I just left it there open like a question I wasn't ready to answer. Then I went back to the kitchen table and opened my laptop. I logged into the shared email account for the business. Michael had never changed the password. I scrolled through the sent folder until I found the thread with David Ramirez, the lead investor. The most recent email was from Michael sent that morning. It said Lauren would be the primary contact moving forward because she had deeper operational knowledge and could commit full time. There was no mention of me at all. I kept scrolling. 2 weeks earlier, there was another message where Michael had written that his wife was supportive but not involved in day-to-day decisions anymore. Supportive but not involved. That was how he had described me to the man who might give us the money we needed to grow. I closed the laptop. My hands were steady now, but my chest felt hollow. I picked up the notebook with my list and added one more line at the bottom. He told strangers I was not involved. The words looked small on the page, but they carried the weight of everything I had ignored for months. At 5:30, my phone rang. It was Michael. I let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, he called again. I answered on the 3rd ring. "Jessica, where are you?" His voice was low and tight, the way it got when he was trying not to sound angry in public. "David just asked why my wife isn't here. I told him you weren't feeling well. You need to back me up on that if he calls you." I didn't answer right away. I could hear voices in the background glasses clinking the low hum of a restaurant or event space. Lauren's laugh floated through for a second before it faded. "I saw the calendar invite," I said finally. My voice came out quieter than I expected, but steady. "My name wasn't on it. You told them I had a prior commitment. That wasn't true." There was a pause. I heard him move somewhere quieter. "We talked about this morning. You were getting too emotional about everything. Lauren and I decided it would be cleaner if you stayed out of it tonight. This is important, Jessica. Don't turn it into a fight. Cleaner, I repeated. The word tasted bitter. You filed an amendment that cuts my equity from 25% to 5%. You didn't tell me. You had Lauren witness it. And now you're telling investors I'm not involved. What exactly am I supposed to be clean about, Michael? He let out a short breath, almost a laugh, but not quite. You always do this. You find one detail and you blow it up until it's about our entire marriage. Lauren has been here helping me every single day while you were at your job. She understands the pressure. She doesn't question every decision I make. If you can't be that person right now, then maybe you need to take some space until the funding comes through. The words landed exactly where he meant them to. I felt them in my throat before I could answer. He was giving me permission to step aside like I was the problem he needed to manage. I looked at the open overnight bag on the bed through the bedroom doorway. It was still empty. I'm not coming tonight, I said. And I'm not going to lie for you if David calls. Jessica. He started to say something else, but I ended the call before he could finish. My thumb hovered over the screen for a second, then I blocked his number. The little red icon appeared. It felt both final and terrifying at the same time. I sat down on the edge of the bed next to the empty bag. The apartment was completely quiet, except for the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. I had just blocked my husband. I had just told him I wouldn't show up for the pitch we had worked on together for months. My younger sister was there in my place smiling for the investors while he rewrote the story of how the company had been built. My hands started to shake again. I pressed them flat against my thighs and took slow breaths until they stopped. Then I opened my contacts and found Dr. Amanda Foster's number. I had seen her twice last year when work stress had started keeping me up at night. She had been kind and direct. I sent her a short message asking if she had any availability this week. She replied within 5 minutes that she could see me Thursday afternoon. I put the phone down and looked at the bag again. This time, I stood up and started folding clothes into it. 2 work outfits, pajamas, toiletries. I didn't know where I was going yet, but I knew I wasn't going to be here when Michael came home. The thought of sitting across from him at this table while he explained why cutting me out of the company was actually for the best made my stomach twist. I zipped the bag and set it by the front door. Then I went back to the kitchen and took a picture of the amendment page with my phone. I sent it to Thomas Gray with a short note asking what my options were if I wanted to protect whatever equity I still had. He replied that we could talk tomorrow morning first thing. I stood in the middle of the living room with my bag by the door and my phone in my hand. The clock on the wall said it was 6:15. The investor pitch was probably in full swing by now. Michael and Lauren were probably standing side by side in front of David Ramirez and the others presenting the version of the company where I had never really been part of the work. I picked up my keys. I didn't have a plan beyond getting out of the apartment before Michael walked back in. I didn't know if I was going to Olivia's or to a hotel or somewhere else entirely. I only knew that staying here and waiting for him to come home and tell me I was overreacting again was no longer something I could do. As I reached for the doorknob, my phone vibrated in my hand. It was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Then I thought it might be Thomas or Olivia calling from a different line. I swiped to accept. Jessica. The voice was male, unfamiliar, and careful. This is David Ramirez. Michael gave me your number last month when we were setting up the meeting. I'm calling because he said you weren't feeling well. but I wanted to check in directly. Are you all right? I stood frozen in the doorway with the bag at my feet. David Ramirez was calling me. The man who was supposed to invest in the company I had helped build was on the other end of the line, asking if I was all right, while my husband and my sister were sitting across from him, telling him I wasn't involved. I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came out at first. The silence stretched between us. David waited. I could hear faint background noise again, the same low hum from earlier. Somewhere in that room, Michael was probably wondering why his phone was lighting up with David's name. I took a breath. My voice came out steadier than I felt. David, I said I think we need to talk. I stood in the doorway with my bag at my feet and answered David Ramirez on the third ring. My voice came out steadier than I felt. I told him I was fine, but that I needed to be honest about something. I explained that I had helped build the financial model and the original pitch materials. I told him my name was on the original operating agreement for 25% equity. I told him an amendment had been filed 2 weeks ago that I had never seen or signed cutting my share to 5%. David was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Michael told us tonight that the operational side has been almost entirely Lauren's work for the past few months. He said you had stepped back because of personal stress. He made it sound like you were barely involved anymore. The words hit exactly where Michael had aimed them. I felt the old familiar sting of being rewritten out of my own life, but this time it was sharper because a stranger was repeating it back to me. I asked David if he would be willing to hear my side before he made any decisions about investing. He said yes. We set up a call for the next morning. After we hung up, I blocked Michael's number for the second time that night and walked out of the apartment with my bag. I drove to Olivia's place without really thinking about the route. She opened the door before I even knocked, like she had been watching the street. I stepped inside, and the tears finally came. They weren't loud. They were the quiet kind that made my shoulders shake while I stood in her hallway, still holding my overnight bag. Olivia didn't ask questions right away. She just took the bag from my hand and set it down, then pulled me into a hug that smelled like the lavender detergent she always used. I stayed on her couch that night. We talked until almost 2 a.m. I told her everything Thomas had found and what David had said on the phone. She listened without trying to fix it. At one point, she said, "Just the hardest part isn't that he did this. The hardest part is that you kept giving him the benefit of the doubt long after his actions already told you who he was." I nodded because I knew she was right, even though it hurt to hear. Michael tried to reach me 3 times that night from an unknown number. I let every call go to voicemail. The last message he left was short and cold. "You're making this worse than it has to be. Lauren and I are handling the investor side now. If you want any part of the company, you need to talk to me like an adult instead of running away." I deleted the voicemail without listening to it again. The next morning, I called Thomas Gray from Olivia's kitchen while she made coffee. He had already reviewed the photos I sent. He told me the amendment was likely unenforceable because I had never consented to it, but unwinding everything cleanly would take time and paperwork. He asked if I wanted to fight for the equity or if I wanted to walk away from the business entirely. I told him I wanted to walk away. I didn't want to spend the next year tied to Michael through lawyers and negotiations. I just wanted my name off the loan I had co-signed and my life back. Thomas was quiet for a second. Then he said, "That's your choice to make. I'll start the paperwork today. You focus on taking care of yourself." After we hung up, I sat at Olivia's table and let the relief settle in. It wasn't happiness. It was the quieter feeling of a decision finally made. Michael came to Olivia's apartment that afternoon. He must have asked someone where I was because he showed up without warning. Olivia answered the door and told him I didn't want to see him. He raised his voice in her hallway, saying this was between him and his wife, and she needed to stay out of it. I walked to the door and looked at him through the small gap Olivia had left open. He looked tired. His tie was loose and his eyes were bloodshot. For a second, I almost felt sorry for him. Then he spoke. "You're really going to throw everything away because you're jealous of your own sister," he said. The words were quiet, but they carried the same cold edge from the morning before. Lauren has been the one showing up every day. She's the one who stayed late when you were too tired or too busy with your own job. You used to be supportive. Now you're just making everything harder. I felt the old hurt rise up, but it didn't take over this time. I looked at him and saw the man who had stood in our kitchen and told me I didn't fit the image he wanted to show investors. I saw the man who had let my sister witness documents that cut me out of the company I had helped start. "I'm not throwing anything away, Michael," I said. My voice was steady. "I'm choosing to stop pretending that your actions haven't already ended this. You changed the paperwork without telling me. You brought Lauren to the pitch in my place. You told David I wasn't involved. Those weren't mistakes. Those were choices. And I'm choosing not to stay for the version of me you've decided I am." He started to say something else, something about how I was overreacting and how we could fix this if I would just calm down. I closed the door before he could finish. Olivia locked it behind me. We stood in her living room and listened to his footsteps fade down the hallway. When the building door slammed shut downstairs, I finally let out the breath I had been holding. I stayed with Olivia for 3 more days while Thomas worked on separating my name from the business loan and the operating agreement. During that time, I saw Dr. Amanda Foster for the first time in over a year. She listened while I told her about the amendment, the transfers, and the way Michael had spoken to me like I was an obstacle he needed to manage. She didn't tell me I had been blind or that I should have seen it coming. She just asked what I needed now that I knew the truth. I told her I needed to stop waiting for people to treat me like I mattered. I needed to believe my own eyes when someone showed me who they were. She nodded like that was the most ordinary thing in the world and wrote down a time for the following week. On the 4th day, I moved into a small 1-bedroom apartment across town. It was nothing like the place Michael and I had shared. The kitchen was tiny and the floors creaked, but it was mine. I unpacked the overnight bag and bought new sheets and a lamp from the store down the street. I didn't put any pictures of Michael or Lauren on the walls. I didn't keep the old notebooks from the business. I started fresh with only what I needed. Brian Hayes, one of Michael's old college friends, texted me 2 weeks later. He said he had seen Michael and Lauren at a networking event together and that Michael had introduced her as his business partner. Brian said he felt weird about it and wanted to check if I was okay. I thanked him and told him I was fine. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them anymore. Lauren tried to reach me once through a mutual friend named Rachel Kim from my old job. Rachel called and said, Lauren wanted to explain that nothing had happened between her and Michael, that they had just been working closely, and that I was misunderstanding everything. I told Rachel I appreciated her calling, but that I didn't need an explanation. I asked her not to pass messages between us anymore. She said she understood, and we left it there. I saw Dr. Amanda Foster every Thursday for 6 weeks. Some sessions I cried through the whole hour. Some sessions I sat quietly and tried to name what I was feeling without making excuses for anyone. Slowly, the sharpest edges of the hurt started to dull. Not because Michael or Lauren had changed, but because I had stopped trying to carry the version of the story where I was the problem that needed to be fixed. 3 months after I moved out, Thomas Gray called to tell me everything was finalized. My name was off the business loan and the operating agreement. I had walked away with nothing from the company I had helped start, but I also walked away with no legal ties to Michael. He told me Michael had signed the separation papers without argument. I didn't ask what that meant for him and Lauren. It wasn't my story anymore. I kept my job at the marketing agency and took on more responsibility there. My boss noticed the change in my focus and gave me a small raise and a project that was entirely mine. I didn't stay late every night anymore. I went home to my quiet apartment and cooked simple dinners and read books I had been meaning to finish for years. Some evenings the silence felt heavy. Some evenings it felt like the first real rest I had known in a long time. I still think about Michael sometimes. Not the version of him from the last few months, but the man I fell in love with, who used to listen like my words mattered. I think about Lauren too, the little sister who used to borrow my sweaters and ask me for advice about boys. Those versions of them are gone now, replaced by the people who stood in my kitchen and told me I didn't fit anymore. I don't hate them. I just don't let them take up space in my life that they chose to leave. The hardest part wasn't walking away. The hardest part was accepting that their actions had already shown me the truth long before I was ready to see it. Michael didn't suddenly become someone else the morning of the pitch. He had been showing me for months who he was willing to become when it served him. Lauren hadn't suddenly decided to take my place. She had been stepping into it every time I made room for her without asking what it cost me. I chose myself anyway. Not because it felt good in the moment, but because staying would have meant continuing to shrink myself to fit a picture that no longer included me. I set the boundary, and I kept it even when it meant eating dinner alone and answering questions from old friends about why Michael and I weren't together anymore. Even when it meant watching my sister's name appear in a group text I had left and feeling the old ache before I put the phone down. Some nights I still wake up and reach for the other side of the bed before I remember it's empty. Some mornings I make coffee for one and feel the quiet press against my chest. But I don't regret the choice. I regret the years I spent believing that loyalty meant staying no matter what their actions cost me. I regret believing that if I just worked harder, or loved better, or stayed smaller, they would eventually choose me back. They didn't, and I stopped waiting. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever had to walk away from people you loved because their actions finally showed you who they really were, what helped you take that step, even when it meant facing the quiet afterward?